Welcome, everybody, to the Finance Essentials podcast. I am your host, Danny Hudson. I know you guys are super excited. It's like two shows within like 3 or 4 days. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get back on the regular cadence. Of kind of putting shows out on Wednesdays. So hopefully you guys out there don't mind the additional content provided this week, and you have plenty of time to watch both of them. That's why I try to keep it at 30 minutes. No problem. Maybe hopefully you can fit it in the day. But it is good to be back. It is good to talk to everybody, and so I really appreciate all of you tuning in, especially if you do have time to fit in 2 shows in the week. It's greatly appreciated over on my side. Again, this is the Finance Essentials podcast. As you guys may have seen at the beginning of the video, or maybe not, but we do have presence on all the social media platforms, and I appreciate everybody who's kind of followed us. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn as well. So, feel free to follow us, join us, participate in all the discussions that we have. I try to post daily content, so that way we can have those types of discussions carry over from the podcast. And if not, feel free to tweet at me. I try to be as active on Twitter as possible. Sometimes I need to go back and delete some comments, Yes, get a little too active, that maybe not a lot of it is value add. So I try to clean it up a little bit, but yeah. So we are on all the social platforms. Also, to check the site out, it's financeessentials.io. The podcast is on there. I'm also considering starting a blog. I don't know if you guys would find some value in that, but I do feel as though there is some value in the written word. I know obviously, the podcast comes out and we try to do that on a weekly basis. But if you guys happen to find some value in a blog, let me know. Let me know. You guys have so far been really good as far as providing value. As we also talked about in the past, I am working on doing a webinar. I should have that hopefully wrapped up within the next week or so here, and that'll probably be at the beginning of December. Stay tuned for additional details on that. Obviously, you guys will be the first ones to know. So, today's show, I know you guys are all super thrilled to understand and learn what the topic is. Several weeks back, we did a show on universities and the COVID impacts of the university and college system. How many universities and colleges potentially will survive this crisis? How many of them may not? What the current college and university system looks like. Is it beneficial? Is it not beneficial? What are the alternatives? I did have a lot of great feedback on that episode. Several people had actually asked to kind of do an additional breakdown as far as the college system over here. Let's see, look at the over here, and then trade schools, professions, working professions, over on this side. Look at it from a finance perspective, provide some thoughts and some feedback on there, and not necessarily say, hey, this one is a better alternative than this one, but say, hey, you know what, there is an alternative. You do have an option. You don't necessarily have to go one way or the other. So I'm going to break that down to you guys today. Again, if you have any alternative viewpoints or any alternative thoughts, let me know. I'm always open to open discussions. So first off, what we probably want to do is we want to set the premise of what is a trade, right? So if we're talking about public education system or private education system, but higher education versus a trade, what is a trade? So a trade is defined as a job that requires a specific skill or set or training and will typically get you running in less than 2 years. So there are a few examples. So building trades, mechanical trades, industrial trades, and medical trades. So again, the gist of that is that it will take you at most 2 years to get your profession, your career up and running. I'm sure a lot of college students or ex-students or graduates like me who took 5 years to graduate were probably like, man, 2 years, it's got its goods and its bads. We'll see how it goes. But also too, I just wanted to kind of rehash some of the things that we had talked about before as far as the higher education system. So a few quick facts as far as what current college debt is currently looking like. Obviously, as a finance podcast and as a finance professional, that's where I tend to gravitate towards in terms of discussion. So current U.S. student loan debt is sitting at about $1.6 trillion. I don't think, well, that may come as a surprise to some of you guys. It's not much of a surprise. It's really sad, though. And then the number of people with student loan debt is about 45 million. And then the default rate currently, now keep in mind this is also pre-COVID. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of really good COVID data that exists. But pre-COVID data, the default rate was approximately 12%. Now, most of you, not all of you, but most of you are probably aware that student loan debt is one of the pieces of debt or one of the financial aspects of your life to where, you know, heaven forbid something happens and you end up having to declare bankruptcy, it does not clear away student loan debt. If you guys find that topic interesting, I will be more than happy to go into that on a later show, or maybe a blog post. Maybe a blog post will pique your interest, and it might be worth reading about. Needless to say, that was a decision that our federal government had made, you know, several decades ago. But you cannot declare bankruptcy and get away from college tuition debt. So, diving into the meat of it, I know we've talked about before as far as college goes. If you happen to miss that episode, by all means, hop over onto SoundCloud, iTunes, financeessentials.io, our site. It is listed there, and I think it was a good one. It was definitely very informative. So feel free to go back and listen to it. So one of the articles that I kind of found to use as the basis was an article that was titled "Why You Should Consider Trade School Instead of College." It was by a gentleman by the name of Trent Ham, and I believe he runs a site or at least a blog that is called The Simple Dollar. One of the big benefits, and you know, Trent obviously is not a listener, but you know, I'll probably tag him in this on Twitter. Trent actually breaks out a lot of the financials for me, so he ends up actually doing a lot of the math. So it actually saves me from having to do extra work. So he did an article, again, it was called "Why You Should Consider Trade School Instead of College." So one of the things that he brings up is for a lot of people, going to a 4-year college seems like an automatic choice when they graduate from high school. I know it basically was for me. The reason is obvious: higher income. According to the National Center of Education Statistics, a bachelor's degree accounts for an average of $17,000 in additional income per year compared to a high school diploma, about $30,000 versus about $47,000. Over a 30-year career in the workforce, that's more than $500,000. Now, one of the things he also talks about is the average cost of a 4-year college or university. Now, again, keep in mind, too, this is not considering community college, dual enrollment, so on and so forth. But the average cost is about $125,000 for a 4-year education. One of the interesting facts that he also brings up in here is that about 40% of attendees at a 4-year college actually drop out before completing their degree. And then, he makes a very interesting point that if you find yourself as part of that 40%, not only have you incurred expenses of college, but you also left without receiving a degree. And then for the 60% that do complete their degree, about 64% take longer than 4 years to graduate. That was me. I was in that boat. Took about 5 years. And then it says, costing themselves an additional about $70,000 in lost wages and educational expense. So how he arrives at that number is the yearly cost of college combined with the lost average income. So is approximately $70,000. So then he compares the two. So an average trade school median salary is about $36,000, and then a bachelor's degree is about $47,000. So one of the things, though, and this is the financial part that he actually saved me from doing, because how I would look at that would be, okay, well this trade school over here is 2 years. And this 4-year university over here is 4 years. Now, one of them is significantly less. One of them takes less time. But then the potential earnings is lower. Over here, you have potential earnings that are higher, but it takes longer and it costs more. So what's the trade-off there? And so what he says is that because the trade school only takes about 2 years versus 4, that amounts to additional 2 years of income for the trade school, or approximately $71,000. Then you factor in an additional $70,000 in cost that many students would take to graduate from college. And the trade school could be over about $140,000 from the get-go, or approximately 12 years difference in income. Now again too, this is also working off of averages. If you go to school, as we'll get into a little bit more detail later, as a high payout, high demand career, it's obviously going to be different. Also too, if you have scholarships and things, that's going to be different. So we're only working off of averages here. But if you work off of averages, you're talking about over a decade head start potentially as somebody who is going into a trade versus somebody who decides to go to a 4-year school. The average trade school degree costs about $33,000 compared to $127,000. Also is a savings of about $95,000. Well, I mean the math is 94, but we like to round around here. If you also assume that students are fully financing their education with loans at 4% over 10 years, the bachelor's degree is about $154,000, while the trade school is about $40,000. That's an average savings of about $114,000 just on the degree. So you couple the 140 plus the 114, and so you're sitting at about $250,000 just on averages, and assuming full financing as far as the degrees go between the trade school and the college. Now again, the title of the show is Finance Essentials, right? So we're just looking at this from a finance perspective. I can't say that if I was to go to a 4-year college that I would have had the same experience, the same networking opportunities, so on and so forth, that it would be from a trade school. But from a strictly finance standpoint, we're talking about approximately $250,000. Or to put it in years, we're looking at about 20 years difference. So in that scenario, if you graduate from a trade school and you graduate from a 4-year university, assuming all the averages that we're working with here, you could have potentially about a 20-year head start on one versus the other, when you're looking at all finances considered. So to me, that was extremely eye-opening. And the major reason for that is because when I went to college, part of the reason why it took me 5 years to graduate was because I changed my major like 9 times. I went in as undecided, and a lot of universities will actually allow you to stay undecided for about 2 years before you really need to pick a major, which means that you're kind of floundering around, or we were, people with a similar mindset, we were floundering around for about 2 years before we really had any idea of what we wanted to do. Now, one of the things that we also don't talk about, and as far as the article and stuff like that goes, is that trade schools are also pretty specific. So for example, my sister is a dental hygienist. She went to school to be a dental hygienist. She really loved being a dental hygienist, and she knew what she wanted to do. When she started to go to college, I had that conversation with her where I said, take some extra classes, take some stuff that maybe you're interested in, but you don't know if you want to do it. And maybe you'll find something else. Maybe you don't necessarily want to do dentistry. And she was like, no, I don't care what you have to say. This is what I'm going to do, and that's what I'm going to go to school for. So that's what she did. She still loves it, and it worked out for her. One of the things that works out in that scenario for trade schools is if you know that's what you want to do. It's not going to be quite as versatile as graduating with a 4-year degree. Now, at the same time, my undergrad was in hospitality. What the hell does that mean? What is hospitality? I mean, that's a broad spectrum of all types of things. Because for me personally, what I found is that I loved the hospitality industry, but I really didn't like dealing with tourists. So when my original goal of hospitality was to become the general manager of a large resort hotel, I started to work in hospitality, and I realized I'm not really a big fan of tourists. I'm not really a big fan of crowds. I'm not really a big fan of dealing with a bunch of different people and stuff like that all the time. I don't know if that's the correct career path for me. But what I was able to do was pivot my hospitality degree into the hospitality industry, so on and so forth, and where I ended up now, which is in finance, which is not exactly hospitality, but what it is that it does tend to be a little bit more versatile. So say for example, you go to a trade school and you learn how to be a welder. My dad knew how to weld. He was pretty good at it. I mean, he was pretty good at just about everything with his hands, a lot better than me. But you might be 2 or 3 years in, and you come home and you open a beer and you're sitting on the couch and you're going, man, I don't think I want to be a welder anymore. You might be in a little bit more trouble, right? Because what you've done is you have gone and you've gotten a trade school degree, and you're probably earning a decent living and so on and so forth. But it would be very difficult for you to potentially pivot, going from being able to weld and being very good at it or whatever it might be, and then going to, well, maybe I want to work in an office or whatever it might be. What you may end up having to do is you may have to pivot to opening up your own business. So therefore you'd be able to hire people to do the welding part of it yourself, or pivot with your current company to work in management or something along those lines. But you would be a little bit more restricted as far as, what your potential opportunities would be. So that's kind of a brief overview as far as the financial differences and some of the benefits and opportunities between the two. The next part that I really wanted to look at, and really wanted to find out, again, especially from a finance perspective, is what does the market look like? One of the things that we talk about on this show, as well as our social media content that we're sharing on a daily basis. One of the, especially too, like the last show where we talk about lockdowns and we've talked about employment impacts and career path impacts. What does the job market look like? What is the future outlook look like? As far as trade schools, as well as education professionals, people that are going into the workplace after getting their bachelor's. One of the big things I know we talked about on the show that we did, the episode about colleges, was really going into unemployment rates as far as degrees go, also to which of the ones were the highest graduating salaries with the lowest unemployment rate. So I don't want to completely rehash a lot of that. However, we always have new listeners, right? So this will be additional valuable content, and I'm sure you guys will probably hear me rehash some of the same stories and so on and so forth. But we always have new listeners, right? So bear with me through some of those. I've only got a limited well. The well is only so deep, and so we will typically tend to kind of touch on some of the same things. But if you are interested, go back and listen to that show, because like I said, I thought it was a pretty good one, and we do go into some additional details on that. So what I did was I went to Indeed.com and I looked at what are some of the most in-demand trades. And then also, too, how does that tend to kind of correspond with what are the highest paying trades? So keep in mind, like we discussed earlier, as far as what a trade is, it's a job that requires a specific set of skills or training and will typically get you running in less than 2 years. So think about it like this. Most of the people that we're going to be talking about that would fall into these categories are probably in the neighborhood of 20, 21, 22, somewhere around in that area. I find it hard to believe that you would probably have someone who worked there. Now, it does happen. I'm sure there are exceptions, and maybe there's some exceptions of folks that are listening, but very difficult to, in my opinion, the majority of your people are not going to be 50-year-old, middle-aged, white-collar workers that are going to go, I'm tired of all this. I want to go be a plumber. Now, it does happen. If you guys have seen Office Space before, he goes from working a white-collar job that he hates to the end of it doing, construction, and Peter couldn't have been happier. So it does happen. But picture the fact that most of these people are going to be probably in their lower 20s. So the most in-demand trades, according to Indeed, the first one is carpenter. The second one was wind turbine technician, which, big push for green energy, so on and so forth. That one definitely also makes sense. Well, carpenter makes sense too, but wind turbine technician also makes sense. HVAC technician, and then practical nurse. Now, one of the things that I also did was I kind of isolated these ones out. They had them categorized. Obviously, I'll link the Indeed portion of it on the notes, the show notes, so that way people can go and look, because it is very interesting. One of the things you'll notice is that some of the trades start off as low as, I think custodian was on there, right? And so custodian started around $12 an hour. The ones I just listed, they're approximately 22 plus ish an hour. Now, obviously, it depends on experience. It also depends on market that you live in. Somebody who is working as an HVAC technician in Chicago or New York City or Miami, they're probably going to have a bit higher salary than somebody who works in Des Moines, Iowa, or Montgomery, Alabama, so on and so forth, kind of thing like that. So the average comes out to be about $22 per hour. Now again, it's well above minimum wage, and just like most professions, the better you are, the more value you create, the higher wage that you can command. One of the other benefits too of a lot of these professions and a lot of these trades and these jobs that we're talking about on the show is that you also have the ability to be able to start your own business. Now, I've started my own business. We also did a show on entrepreneurship, right? That showed entrepreneurship in the year 2020 is up significantly over 2019. A lot of that is driven by COVID. So COVID, it ends up making a lot of people change their perspective on their careers, on their jobs, so they start their own business. A lot of these professions, you do have the ability to be able to pivot it off and start your own job. Another one big advantage that I don't actually have notes on this, but it's easy to do some research, is the fact that a lot of the people that work in these trade professions are boomers, right? They're older. And so they're going to be retiring. And a lot of these are finding that there's a big shortage in terms of qualified people. So right now, that average salary might be $22, $23 an hour. But as shortages go up, and we talk about a lot of laws of economics, well, we don't talk about a lot of laws of economics, but we talk about supply and demand. We talk about economic principles, and one of the big ones is supply and demand. And if you're working in an area that only had 2 or 3 carpenters or 2 or 3 HVAC technicians, and 2 of those retire, you're the only game in town, and that gives you the flexibility and the ability to be able to charge more. So what you're also finding is a lot of these trades have an older generation. They'll retire, which is going to open up the room for younger people to come in and step up and start that business. One of the other things too that it also doesn't talk about is that a lot of these are going to be more in demand physically. So for example, if you look at me here, this is my primary office. I'm sitting in the computer room here and doing my work and doing my show, whereas it's actually kind of raining outside. So there are guys that are out there that are doing these jobs that are working out in the rain. So it is going to also be a little bit more of a physical demand, and that's also one of the reasons why too, when we talk about spinning this off and starting your own business, one of the advantages that you potentially have is if you're good and you're knowledgeable and you know how to run a business, being able to put yourself in a situation where eventually you'll be able to have people that work under you, or be able to sell it, sell your business, sell your book of business and your customers to another enterprise, and potentially be able to retire, that way, or start your own. Maybe it's a consulting business or so on and so forth. So next I wanted to go into some of the highest paying trades. So essentially what these are is these are in the trade industry, in the trade business, but this is based off of the highest salaries. Now, this does not necessarily mean that they're in the highest demand, but obviously the demand is there because there's a shortage in just about every single trade that is out there. But plumber, which, I mean, plumbers tend to get a bit of a bad rap, mainly just because, they're stereotypical, butt crack hanging out, kind of thing. But plumber, construction manager, and elevator mechanic were the 3 that really kind of stood out. But these guys all average over $80,000 a year. Now, one thing it doesn't go into consideration is overtime, right? So if you're working a white-collar job and you're making $80,000 a year, working 40 hours a week, there might be some comparison there to working a blue-collar job, but maybe you're working 50 hours a week. So, but the salary may be around the same, but there might be obviously a little bit more demand. And then below that was nuclear medicine technologist, which I don't really know what that means. I don't know what that is. If you're one of those, feel free to email me or message me and let me know what exactly that means. And then there's also dental hygienist and web developer. So both of those are also additional trades, and they also tend to average salaries of over $70,000 a year. So what these are is these are trades that are in demand, and the salaries are much more reasonable than most people would think. Now, obviously, when we talked about earlier where the average salary of your trade profession is low 30s, there's going to be some, and obviously more in number, that are going to be much lower on that scale. One of the examples that we used was a custodian. My guess is that those are, doing some quick math in my head, are probably around 27 to 30,000, and so those are going to be, on the lower end. And then one of the other ones too that I wanted to do just for comparison's sake is the most in demand jobs for 4-year degrees. Now, the reason why I wanted to do this is really be able to kind of compare and contrast, right? So again, going back to the college episode that we did, part of the reason why I wanted to include this was because a lot of the high demand professions out of college are STEM degrees. A lot of engineers, math, so on and so forth. Now, I mean, I like to think that I'm a pretty smart guy, but chances are, if you look at that top 10 highest paying graduate degree list, as well as most in demand, so on and so forth, I probably would struggle with just about every single one of those. So if my alternatives was struggle in school, do really poorly trying to get an engineering degree, and be a really bad engineer and make $40,000 or $50,000 a year, or go to trade school, bust my hump a little bit more and be a plumber and makes even, well, I mean, even if it was the same, obviously it would be a slightly more, or because I could probably do that one better. But the choices for me would be relatively obvious, right? So a lot of your STEM degrees, a lot of people are capable of doing them, but for me, that a lot of those are just not for me. I love math in the sense that, how does it make financial sense? How does it make business sense? But to do math just to do math is a very difficult concept for me to grasp. I know the engineers listening are probably yelling at me, and they're doing one of these and watching the video, but I mean, you guys are much more capable of being able to do what you do, more so than me. I would not be able to provide good value for an engineering firm from an engineering perspective. So anyway, that's a long way about saying that the most in-demand jobs for a 4-year degree, now this is according to U.S. News, is a logistician. Now, that one actually makes a lot of sense, especially in a current COVID world. Essentially, what a logistician is doing is working with supply chains, right? So we've seen supply chains break down, even going back to the show that we did earlier this week, is supply chains are breaking down, and so what their job to do is to fix those supply chains, understand the supply chains, and what starts up here ends down here, and understand everything in between. So that one makes sense. What you would get a degree in, that part I'm not 100% sure. If any of you out there are logisticians, maybe I pronounced your title wrong, but let me know what that works out to be. And then there's a cost estimator, an industrial engineer, actuaries, and statisticians. Actuary was another really interesting one. Actuaries, if you guys aren't really familiar with actuaries generally tend to work with very, very large data sets to draw specific conclusions. So for example, when I worked at Expedia, I worked on the loyalty program, and so we had actuaries that analyzed massive data sets, and what they would give us would be a redemption rate. So as we worked with customers who were part of the rewards program to do our financial data, we would use a basis of a redemption rate to provide a proper accrual amount. Accrual amount is basically saying, if you have 100 points that have been accumulated based off of the actuarial data, we anticipate, a 70% redemption rate. You need to have an amount of cash on hand to account for 70% of those 100 points. So the cash value might be $100, but you need to have enough cash on hand based off of this actuarial redemption rate to account for 70% or 70 of those points being redeemed. And so that's kind of what we did as far as our actuaries go. Now, the highest paying postgraduate degrees are data scientist, software engineer, product manager, investment banking analyst. Now, all of those professions are going to make at least $85,000 a year. Now, again, too, a lot of these are also kind of starting salaries. So another advantage that you would have by going this route would be those starting salaries. Now, again, I mean, I could probably do product manager. The other ones, you're going to have to count me out. But the opportunity is there to earn a higher starting salary. Whereas on the trade side, chances are, if you're starting out, you're not going to be at that level. But if you're good and if you're in a good market, if those guys that are graduating, we'll say at 4 years, so they're 22 and they're making $85,000. If you started being a carpenter or an electrician at 18, there's a possibility that you could be relatively close in that range around the same time, around 22, maybe 23, right around in that neighborhood. So, how does this all tie back to me, right? That tends to be kind of the underlying theme, that I really talk about a lot on this show, and it's that there's always an alternative, right? There's always an option. If you're currently in a job that maybe you're not happy with, or you're not in a profession that you're happy with, maybe it's worth looking into some of these on the side. For example, I used to have a friend of mine, Eric, and he was in the military, and he worked in an accounting firm, and he did all of those kind of things, but his passion was animals. And so what he ended up doing was he left all of that. Now he also left more money, which that would hurts a little bit. But he left his job dealing with accounting and that whole world, the office world, and because his passion was animals, and so he wanted to work with animals, and so that's where he started. He went back and he started working with us at Discovery Cove, and started to work with the animals and SeaWorld, and did some traveling and that kind of thing, because that's what he was passionate about. But you don't necessarily have to be stuck in one place. One of the benefits, again, in a COVID world is that with 20 million people that have become unemployed, you do have options out there. And another thing too, being in my 30s, I know I might look a little older, but being in my 30s, I think a lot of my target audience here, a lot of the people that are listening are probably similar. And you have kids, or you're in that range, or maybe they're soon, or maybe your kids are a little bit older and they haven't quite gone to college yet. But there is an alternative, right? You don't necessarily have to say, hey guys, college is the only route. College is the only way. Or you might have a kid who is completely undecided. I know with Oliver, one of the things that I would like to do when he gets older is spend a portion of his summers apprenticing and shadowing with people who work in certain professions. I have a friend of mine who happens to own his tree trimming business, Lumber Logistics. I'll give a shout out to Mr. Kevin Cook here. But he works doing a lot of landscaping and tree trimming and things like that. If Oliver got a little bit older, I would love for him to go and spend a couple of weeks, provide Kevin some free labor, some free child labor to help out, but also give Oliver a little bit of taste, and James too, but a little bit of a taste of what it's like to work, in outside and work with your hands, to see if maybe that's something that he's interested in. So again, it's providing options, right? It's pivoting your current career, your current business, your current job, and then understanding too what those financial impacts are, and helps you make the best and the right financial decision for you and for your family, to empower you to be able to do that. So that's the show for this week. Again, find us all on social media. If you LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, all of the above, financeessentials.io. If you like the show, share it with a friend, share it on social media, give it a like, give it a subscribe, and we'll talk to you next week. All right. Bye.